All right, welcome back to Niners Nightly on the Sports Leader. Larry Krueger with you and joining us on the UMA guest line to talk a little NFL football and some schematic trends that we're starting to see from around the league is Ted Nguyen, who's a great follow at FB underscore film analysis on X. Does a great job covering the NFL for The Athletic, and he's with us on the UMA guest line to talk a little ball. Ted, how are you?
Doing well. Just got back from Mexico, so I'm well rested, well fed, and ready to talk some football.
Oh, awesome, awesome! I just came off of vacation myself. Well, I was reading, and funny, I was sitting on a beach in Connecticut a couple weeks ago, reading the Athlons. This is in the summertime, whether I'm in Tahoe, wherever I'm at. I like to read the annuals, and I'll go cover to cover, just reading all about whatever the media has to say in these annual guides on the NFL. And so I was reading the Athlons one, and there was a great article in there from Doug Farrar, who I've been following for years, and he's just a very knowledgeable football guy. And he's basically talking about schematic trends in the NFL, and it's just a really interesting piece. And it's like, he kind of talks about how there's always through the history of football have been the evolution of kind of the different trends on both sides of the ball, the T formation on offense, force defenses out of 6 and 7 man fronts and into 5 man fronts. And then the more complex passing games arrived in the 40s and 50s, and that led to some umbrella defenses. And then the AFL in the 60s kind of made the passing attacks were more intricate, and the AFL teams were really good at it. That led to zone defenses, the advent of the nickel, the dime. You had the Bill Walsh offense in the 80s, where you flooded a zone and made defenses make decisions. And then you had these high pressure defenses. Buddy Ryan led the 46 defense. Floyd Peters was a key guy that helped the Vikings eliminate the Niners in '87. Belichick and Parcells obviously were together for those New York Giants teams in the mid '80s and early '90s. So, and then, recently the two running back sets have become nearly extinct, and teams are going with 3 wide receivers a ton, and defenses have gone to more variable fronts and coverages to try to counter. So there's always this X's and O's game that goes back and forth, and you're a guy who does a lot of film work and a lot of breakdown, and gets into the schematics. How excited are you to see a new season of football and the new, the kind of the new wrinkles that may come along with it on either side of the football?
Yeah, I love it. It's one of the reasons why I love football specifically more than any other sport. It's just, when you have 22 players on the board and every position is so different. Like in basketball, positions are different, but at the same time, everybody's going to handle the ball. Everybody's trying to get the ball in a bucket. But in football, every position is so different, and it leads to so much schematic battles on the board every time. And then every year, like you said, there's always these schematic trends and changes. And I think there's always exciting passing game stuff that's going on, but it feels like football is going back to whoever could be the most physical team is going to win the games, because defenses have gotten so light. You're playing a lot of too deep shells, and they're doing all these things to counter the passing game. Now, old school football is coming back a little bit, and we saw that with the Eagles. So it's not so much being excited for, let's see what scheme changes next. It's seeing which teams can adapt and play that physical brand of football and punish those light defenses.
One of the things Farrar goes into is the pre-snap motion that, Bill Walsh really brought us pre-snap motion with the Bengals in the late 70s, and he brought it to the Niners in the early 80s with the West Coast offense. And it used to be at first, a coverage indicator. So, if a guy goes in motion across the coverage, if a defender ran with him, maybe you were getting man-to-man. If they passed it off, maybe you were getting zone. But it's not used as much for that anymore, right? Now it's used to, as Farrar points out, to kind of define and disrupt is how he describes it. But basically, it's Kyle Shanahan's really good at this. Target a conflict defender in an area of the field and attack him and use pre-snap motion to isolate And I thought some of the numbers on this, Ted, were really interesting. In 2024, quarterbacks without pre-snap motion completed 64% with a 90.3 passer rating. If you had pre-snap motion last year, those quarterbacks completed a little bit better percentage, 67% with a 94.2 passer rating. But the number that jumped out to me is last year when quarterbacks did use pre-snap motion and the eventual target was the player who went in motion, they wind up completing about 75% with a QB rating over 100. So we're starting to see teams use pre-snap motion differently. Tell me what you've noticed.
Yeah, I think one trend that emerged last year was fast motion, and that was when Tyreek and the Dolphins really started this at the beginning of last year, and a bunch of teams started copying it around the league, and it really gave defenses a headache when you have a receiver motion outside. So he's not going across the formation. He's going outside to the same side he's lined up on. So if he's lined up to the right, he's bursting outside to the right sideline and he's going upfield. And this creates sort of a Canadian football effect where you get your receiver going full speed right at the snap of the ball. He can't go vertical like in Canadian football, but he's building his speed horizontally and then he's getting upfield and then and then if you have a guy like Tyreek Hill who could cut on a dime by getting him full speed upfield on sort of a wheel and having him cut inside, that's very hard for defenses to stop. And then you have to expand out. So when you're expanding out, you could hit that slot receiver inside of Tyreek Hill when he's going in motion or something like that. And that was a huge trend. And I talked to the Niners coach Brian Fury. He actually said he thinks the Niners are the team who actually invented that motion by accident. Kyle Juszczyk kind of false started, and then he went outside, and that was the beginning of that motion, which was created kind of by accident. And Mike McDaniel took it to the Dolphins, and obviously took it to a whole nother level over there.
Yeah, I mean, some people call it sprint motion. What it really does is it creates unbelievable eye candy because the sprint in and of itself creates kind of an urgency. Just when you see a player sprinting anywhere on the field, your eyes go to that player. I do think you're going to see more of that, and we did see more of that last year. Now, defenses are reacting to a lot of this motion by aligning their safeties pre-snap in one spot and then moving them post-snap to try to create, I mean, you could say confusion. I don't even think they're really trying to create confusion anymore. It's just kind of hesitation. And the most common shift is to be in that two deep shell and move one of those safeties up onto up on the line of scrimmage into the box or into the slot, assuming that two deep look. That's the most common shift. How do you think defenses are doing defending the motion?
I think last year we saw them get a little bit more used to seeing that fast motion. I think if you just play discipline and you don't panic, but obviously it's a lot harder not to panic when you have Tyreek Hill running full speed at the line of scrimmage. But I think that sharp mode, it's actually, so the Dolphins call it sharp, funny enough, because it's short and out. Sharp motion. Yeah, they actually call it that, which is pretty funny. Mike McDaniel has a sense of humor. But, talking to defensive coordinators about it, they didn't seem too worried. They thought that when it first happened, they didn't have a lot of time to adjust to it because they were seeing it a lot during the season. But I think they spent the offseason repping it. And if they don't panic and they kind of just flow into their zones, they're okay. Obviously, if you're in man coverage, it's a lot harder to defend because you have to kind of go through a pick if that motion's going outside of a receiver. But if you're playing soft zone, which is what a lot of defenses are doing now, they're playing too high, they're playing quarters, four deep. It's a little bit easier to adjust, and that's one of the adjustments. Is just playing your zones and playing deep.
One of the other wrinkles that Doug Farrar brought up in this article, and I would encourage anybody to check it out, it's in the Athlon's football NFL preview, is that offensive coordinators are calling more quick game than ever before. And the numbers show it. Last year, there were 4,755 NFL dropbacks where the quarterback threw the ball in a 0 or a one-step drop. 5 years ago, that number was 3,940. So we've seen almost 1,000 more quick game dropbacks in a 5-year period. Now, why is that? It's more RPO. more RPO plays, more run pass option. Last year, quarterbacks completed almost 71% on 0 and 1 step drops. A lot of that coming in the red zone. The guy who really did it the most was Joe Burrow. He led the NFL, 246 dropbacks of 0 or 1 step drops, and he completed 74% of those passes for gaudy numbers, too, 17 touchdowns and 4 picks. So what do you think? I mean, the quick game seems to be, it's like almost, I almost feel like Mahomes 2 years ago against the Ravens in Baltimore in the AFC title game, they were geared up to sack him. And the Chiefs just said, you know what? No, we're going to run be in the A gaps, and then we're going to go quick game, 0 step, 1 step, ball comes out, and you're not going to get any 5 or 7 step drops against Mahomes. We're not going to allow you to rush our quarterback and create negative plays. And Kansas City wound up beating Baltimore in Baltimore that day to go to the Super Bowl. Eventually, of course, as we know, beating the Niners for the championship. But what do you think? It seems like Shanahan at times is dropping 5 step drops, 7 step drops, where it seems like the trend right now is to get the ball out and not give defenses a chance to hit your quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it's always a cat and mouse game with football. And like we mentioned, one of the defensive trends is to play this four deep, play two high safeties, play everything from depth. And obviously, the offensive natural reaction to that is just to throw underneath these guys and try to create yards after the catch. And, one of the reasons why this two deep, four deep, trend emerged was because Vic Fangio was able to stop the Rams with it in 2018, and then Bill Belichick took that blueprint and really ran with it in the Super Bowl. And one of the reasons why the Rams couldn't move the ball on offense was because it had no quick game. Everything was either deep or intermediate, and Goff really struggled in the quick game that year, and they couldn't beat those soft shells. So now, with those defenses playing deeper, naturally they're just gonna offenses are gonna throw short. So it's no surprise that with the defenses playing more soft coverage than ever, we're seeing more quick game than ever.
And of course that's then it's like, how do you counter the quick game, right? How do you counter it? And the guy who's done the best job of countering it is Steve Spagnuolo with the Chiefs. And defenses counter the quick game with a lot of press man at the line of scrimmage, and Spags has led the press man coverage trend since he got there in 2019. Kansas City has made 5 of 6 Super Bowls. They've won 3. And last year, they led the NFL in press rate. Kansas City played press man 88% of the time. Now, it's not the old days of, just press man exclusively. There's press bail, there's press match, there's some wrinkles to press coverage. And talk to us about what you see when you see teams, playing more press. And it kind of makes me wonder if the Niners, drafted guys like Darrell Luter Jr., who played almost exclusively press man at South Alabama, with the idea that this was the trend and that they were, even though they like to play a lot of zone, that they were going to be forced to play a lot more man, in the years ahead. What do you think?
Yeah, I think if you could play press man, you could give a different look to offenses that they aren't used to seeing. And the Broncos, who were the number one defense in several statistical categories last year, they're kind of a throwback team. They played just straight up cover one with Patrick Surtain and Riley out there, um, and like you said, the Chiefs play a lot of press man. They give you a different look. So the tricky part is getting corners. You need to have a lot of good defensive backs if that's going to be your philosophy, because you can't be a press man team and all of a sudden just change your philosophy if one of your starting corners get hurt. And that's a problem, is finding those defensive backs and building depth with your defensive back room. And the Chiefs have been able to do it. The Broncos were able to do it last year, and maybe the Niners are going to try to collect these press man guys and give a different look to teams, because the Robert Saleh did start playing some of that with the Jets with Sauce Gardner and Reed. So maybe he's trying to bring that philosophy to the Niners. And anytime you could give a look that's different for offenses, a look that they're not used to preparing for week after week, because as we mentioned, the trend now is playing more soft coverage, you have an advantage.
Well, and if you say to me, give me a a team on the rise in the NFL and why, I would say it's the Denver Broncos for what you just described there. They have outstanding cornerback play. They have Surtain on one corner, and they just drafted Jedi Barron, who, in my
Yep.
opinion, that would have been the guy that I would have drafted for the 49ers inside that top 12 pick. I mean, I think Barron is a stud corner. He's already looked good in the OTAs. They also have Riley Moss, so why do I like Denver? Why do a number of people like Denver? Because Denver can play a ton of press man and get in your face and shut off your water. Let's talk a little bit about trend number 3 that Doug brought up here, and I think it's a good one. It's an interesting one. Condensed formations on offense. Now, and this is we see this in college with the wider hash. You see them doing some creative things in the middle of the field, and NFL coaches and offensive coordinators are trying to copy it with all of the targets lined up inside the numbers. Last year in 2024, 23 teams lined up in condensed formations at least 30% of the time, led by the Rams and the Niners, who both did it on about 60% of their offensive snaps. And if you're saying, well, how much of this trend has changed in the last 5 years? Well, 5 years ago, the Rams led the NFL in condensed formation rate at 53%, and the Niners were second at 50%. And now here we are 5 years later, and they're both at 60%. And you got a bunch of teams, so 5 years ago the Niners were 50%. Only 3 other teams went over 30%. So the trend is absolutely clear. Why do you think we're seeing more condensed formations, in your opinion?
Yeah, the funny thing is you're going to notice a lot of these trends stem from Kyle Shanahan and Sean McVay, and they run the outside zone system. So when you have condensed formations, you could more easily involve your receivers in the running game. And as we know, you need to be able to run block if you're going to play for Kyle Shanahan and Sean McVay. You need to be able to hit those crack blocks. You need to be able to help on the backside of zone blocks and all those things. And when you're in those condensed formations, you have better angles, and then you could play action off of it and get open. And when you're in those condensed formations, you have a two-way go, and you really are forcing defenses to communicate because they don't know which way you're going to go off the snap. If you're more spread out, it's a little easier to predict where you're going to go as a receiver. But with those condensed formations, you have the two-way go. You have a threat of pick routes. It's hard to play man coverage against those type of formations. So run blocking and just forcing defenses to communicate are why we're seeing so many cadet formations, and it's tough to defend. You really have to really be good with passing off receivers, communicating, coming up on the run and run support. You really force defensive backs to use their entire skill set.
It's more difficult to play press man against wide receivers lined up in condensed formations. As you correctly pointed out, it's easy for them to pick off defenders and design picks. It also kind of blurs the picture for the defensive backs as to which players lined up where. Who's the slot receiver? Who's the outside receiver? I've got Cooper Kupp, but he's in the slot. Oh, but wait, in this formation, he's lined up outside, and there can create some hesitation and some confusion for defensive backs, especially young defensive backs. I think it's also kind of interesting that how the Ravens went against the Niners. If you remember on Christmas night, Michael McDonald blitzed Brock Purdy off of those condensed formations. Yep. And to me, this is another weakness of the condensed formation is that there's pros to it from the offensive perspective, but the downside is if you've got a really good slot corner blitzer, he's literally standing right there off the defensive end's ear, ready to crash down and get your quarterback. And the way the Ravens sent pressure off the slot in those condensed formations and then drop defenders into the middle of the field, it muddied things up for Brock Purdy. It created the either pressure or the illusion of pressure and kind of sped him up mentally and kind of caused him, I think, to kind of maybe not make great decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. And another defensive coordinator that's really good at blitzing the slot corners is Steve Spagnuolo. And as we know, he's had some success against Kyle Shanahan. And that's one of the reasons he's willing to blitz those corners. And it's tough when you're living in those condensed formations because the distance between that slot corner and the quarterback is so short.
Let's talk a little bit before we finish here about the difference between Robert Sala's first trip here to San Francisco compared to now. When he first was here, I mean, it's like you go back how quickly things change as far as trends. A decade ago, cover three was very, very popular, and that Seattle defense was a defense that the Niners basically copied when Saleh was here, with the single deep safety. And I think it was in vogue because Seattle made it look so easy. But then I think people realized that, man, you got to have a very special football player manning the deep middle. And not everybody's got an Earl Thomas that can hit like a linebacker and cover like a corner. And he was like the perfect guy to play that single high in the cover three. And then offenses came out and they just said, we're going to attack that cover three with 3-by-1 sets, and we're going to throw all kinds of vertical routes, and and good luck trying to defend multiple vertical routes with a single high safety. And I think defensive coordinators then kind of countered and went back to the two. I'm not saying the Tony Dungy Tampa 2 or the Bud Carson Steeler cover 2, but they went back to kind of a two deep look, and whether it be cover 6. Which quarters coverage, cover 4, or cover 6, where you got man-to-man on one side, you got zone on the other side. We're seeing a lot more, like in 2024, single high, cover 3, quarterbacks completed 79% with a 100.9 rating. But last year, when quarterbacks faced some form of a too high shell, either a cover 2, a 2-man, a cover 4, a cover 6, quarterbacks against those, two deep safety looks completed only 67% with a quarterback rating about 86.5. So for whatever reason, the quarterbacks are struggling much more against the two high safeties instead of the single high. What are you seeing?
Yeah, when you're in those two highs, you could rotate into coverage late, so you're not showing your coverage before. And teams are still playing cover three, but when they're playing it from a too high alignment, and you don't know which way that safety's going to rotate, if he's even going to rotate or he stays deep, just creating that second of hesitation, it creates a huge advantage for defenses. So I think when you're playing single high and you're playing that cover three system, the thing you really need is you need your 4-man pass rush to be confident. And that's one of the reasons why the Niners have been so adamant on making sure they have a defensive line that could rush the passer and single gap and get upfield, and disrupt when they're playing that system. And you also need an inside linebacker that is special in coverage, and they have that in Fred Warner. Obviously, the Seattle teams had Bobby Wagner, and I think over the years the Niners defensive line has kind of fallen off, and that's one of the reasons why they made it such a big focus to make sure to get those defensive linemen in this year's draft. So I think Robert Saleh coming back, I think we'll see that single high system, that cover three system, but we'll see a mix of cover 4 and rotating into those coverages. And that's one of the adjustments he made. I think even in 2018, when the Niners went to the Super Bowl, he started mixing some of those Vic Fangio concepts into that single high system. So, we'll see a mix of it, but we'll still definitely see a good amount of single high with Robert Saleh.
Ted Nguyen with us on the Yuma guest line as we talk a little X's and O's between now and training camp. We got a little extra time, and I thought this would be a good time to kind of go through some of the schematics. All right, 2 last questions. Let's hit one on offense, one on defense. A good coach will always custom his plan to his personnel. Last year, the Niners had Debo. This year, they don't have him. Last year they had Ayuk. This year they may not have him, at least not for a good portion of the season. But what they do have is they have a lot more speed. Jordan Watkins looks like a downfield threat, 4.3 speed. I say Jacob Cowing definitely has improved, and I would say he's going to make big plays. Demarcus Robinson shows the ability to separate down the field, which is why he averaged almost 17 yards per reception. And then you got Garendo, who's just I mean, he's one of the best receiving backs I've seen come into the league in a while, and I think there's huge potential there. All right, Ted. If you're Kyle Shanahan, it's different weapons. Give me a thought or two on how he may utilize his different looking weapons. And let's be honest about it. There's a lot more speed on this Niner offense than they had a year ago.
Yeah, I think to me, when you had Debo Samuel, and you have Christian McCaffrey and George Kittle, so much of the Niners' offense was built around the run game and built around this kind of positionless football where you're in 21 personnel, or you could be in 11 personnel, and Debo becomes that second back. And we saw that when Debo carried the ball, and we saw the motions and shifts and all the different players carrying the ball in that offense, and there was almost an element of trickery to it. And that really helped out the quarterback. We saw Jimmy Garoppolo play well in this system, and then he gets out of this system, and he's barely even a backup in the league. And I'm not saying Brock Purdy's not an elite quarterback, but obviously having this system helps him. But I think as we're moving in this direction and Brock Purdy getting paid what he's getting paid, I think this offense is it becomes more Brock centric. It becomes more drop back centric, and it becomes more of a, I guess you could call it a normal NFL offense where you're seeing concepts built for the quarterback to have to decipher the defense and win with the drop back game, and that's why we're seeing receivers with more speed, and I think we're going to see more of a drop back passing game with Kyle Shanahan than we've ever seen him before. And we saw a little bit of that last year. They really got into the drop back game without any play action. And I thought Brock Purdy grew last year, and his stats didn't show it, but I thought he grew as a quarterback. And this year, as the team gets healthier, you have Christian McCaffrey. It's not like they're ever going to abandon the run game, but I think Brock Purdy's going to have to shoulder a lot more of the load than previous Kyle Shanahan quarterbacks.
Do you think we'll see more 12 personnel with Kittle and Farrell on the field together, especially with Ayuk out early?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think we'll see more 12 personnel, and that's going to be one of the big schematic changes next year. You see all these teams trying to find that second tight end. Again, it's one of those things to counter those light defenses. So I think as Kyle Juszczyk gets a little bit older, finding that second tight end that can really help you out as a blocker and be a mismatch in a passing game is essential.
Last one for you, Ted, and we appreciate your time. 49ers, a big part of this year is how good is their remade rookie led defensive front. You're going to have Nick Bosa, but you could potentially have CJ West, Alfred Collins, and Mikael Williams, at least on first and second down, starting opposite Nick Bosa. And then I'm really intrigued to see what it looks like on third downs, where you have Bosa and Bryce Huff coming off the edges, and you got possibly Yatir Gross Matos and Mikael Williams inside as two guys who can really move, and maybe even this Sebastian Valdez, who looks tremendous to me, but we'll see. He's still a late round guy. What do you think of the 49ers remade defensive front? Do you think that, is there enough quality up front? Is there enough quality depth? How do you think that NASCAR package is going to look with the, kind of the four defensive end alignment, which the Niners have gone to quite frequently in recent years in obvious passing situations?
Yeah, I mean, like we mentioned, when you're playing that single high system that Robert Saleh likes to play, you really need that four-man pass rush to be disruptive, not only in the passing game, but in against the run also. And um, the Niners have got to a position where they're not going to be signing Milton Williams for the contract he got from the Patriots, but they have to invest in that defensive line. So you're investing in pieces that aren't sure things, like Michael Williams, first round draft pick. Theoretically, he could be a very good player, but we won't know until he's actually on the field. Bryce Huff is a bit of a gamble because, obviously he had a down year, but we think he could be good playing, going back into a single gap type of system. So you have guys that have something to prove and aren't sure things, but I think they've invested um, the proper amount into this defensive line, and we'll have to see if it all kind of gets put together when they're actually on a field. But we see the intention of how they're trying to build out this defense. But again, it's not like you have these sure things huge free agent acquisitions or players that have been extremely productive year after year.
It's going to be interesting. Robert Saleh's back. I think he's being painted as the savior, but as we know, it's a players' league, and you got to have players, and we'll find out come this summer if the Niners did a good job restocking the cupboard on the defensive side of the ball. Ted, awesome stuff. Ted's a great follow, as I said, on X, at FB_film analysis. Ted, thanks for stopping by on KNBR and chopping it up with us.
No problem. Thanks for having me on.
All right, we got more straight ahead. It's Niners Nightly, and we'll have our stat of the week coming up next. Stat of the night, I should say, coming up next on the Sports Leader.